Good afternoon, everybody. Hello? Is this on?
Got the podium.
Is this on? Hello? Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right, I see some liveliness now out there. Welcome to the first meeting in February of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. Yes, it is February 1st. You made it through January. Enjoying the spring weather? Yes? Okay, good. I'm President-elect Kevin Kassir, filling in for Becky, who is as a business meeting. So it's a great opportunity to stand in front of you today, and I always look upon it as an honor. And it seems that we always have great programs when I'm up here, and we have that today. I'm a big fan of Noche, as I said to Max, so looking forward to his presentation. There's a birthday in the house today. We have a young man's birthday today, John Cortizio. So given we have a musical event, and given that Sean Mullen happens to be right here, because you wouldn't want me to lead the happy birthday celebration or song, I'm going to ask Sean to come up here and lead us to honor Mr. Cortizio.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Happy birthday, John. In the key of A. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you.
Have a great day, John.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Okay, now we're going to go into the moment of inspiration, Pledge of Allegiance, a four-way test. I get to welcome Randy Worth.
Thank you, Kevin, and I think the liveliness just left. Well, here we are post-Christmas. Amazon drivers are getting a break. FedEx and UPS guys are almost caught up sending the Amazon stuff back. Life is good. There are many of us, that remember maybe a simpler time, maybe a more Americana time. Our postmen dreaded the time, but that glorious 3 times a year when we got sale magazines. And nothing was more hallowed in our house than the Sears and Roebuck Christmas catalog. You could sit on it in the car, you could use it as a doorstop, and it didn't wear out until the spring and summer catalog came. Of all the catalogs though, the Sears and Roebuck catalog maybe has the most interesting history. Richard Sears was a telegraph operator in Chicago in the early 1880s. And 1880 is kind of interesting to me because in Des Moines, there are no less than 20 companies whose founding was before 1880 that are still in business. I got to retire from one of those. And they're glad they got rid of me. But in those days, the telegraph lines ran along the railroad lines. So Richard Sears was a telegraph operator, and his office was in the rail depot. And so he knew whatever was going to happen up and down the line, and he probably knew what was happening in your life too, because that's where you went to send a telegraph, right? And so one day here comes a crate that was delivered to his depot, and after a few days he noticed it was still sitting there. Nobody came to claim it. So being the good person that he is, he went and looked, and he called or telegraphed the owner, the shipper of the crate, and said, hey, this thing's still sitting here, nobody's claimed it, you want it back? And they said, nah, it costs too much to send it back. Would you sell the stuff for me? And without thinking, he says, okay. So he opens up the crate, and it's a crate full of pocket watches. So not when he said he'd sell them, right? So he builds a display in his office, puts out pocket watches, and then uses the telegraph to go up and down the line to other telegraph operators and railroad employees that he's selling quality pocket watches at a reasonable price, and they sold like hotcakes. So he sends the money off, then he orders a crate for himself. Does this over and over and over again using the profits to buy more watches. His watch gig is a pretty good deal. So he hires Alva Roebuck, who was a watchmaker, and sets up shop as a mail order watch outfit in Minneapolis. While Sears goes on and adds more things to his display. And along about 1887, he says this telegraph operator thing ain't so good anymore, but the mail order retail deal is pretty good. So he moves his operation and the watch operation into a new building in Chicago, and the rest is history. Sears Roebuck becomes the biggest employer in Chicago. At their height was a $10 billion a year company, and there you have it. So there's two questions I have for us today and one observation. Are those types of opportunities available today? Are we overlooking things? And I know when I was working, I came in, I knew what was supposed to happen during the day, right? But you kind of had contingency plans in the back of your head in case this went wrong or that went wrong or this changed or whatever. But did I not take it far enough to take those what ifs into opportunities? Question for you and your associates. And my observation, you can sell watches at the train depot, but that won't make the train run on time. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now the five wages.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And is it fun?
Meet and greet.
College and commerce and industry. Hey Jeremiah, I can see it. Yeah. It's a pretty good one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get back to it. Today we have one guest, so as a reminder, everybody, be thinking about who you can bring. Today would have been a great day. We have Sherry Mullen, the wife of Sean Mullen. Sherry, could you stand and we could recognize you? Okay, next it is tumbler time. We suggest a $5 donation into the tumbler. You don't have one of these dollar notes on the badge, but consider putting money in there anyway. Or, and Doug didn't pay me for this to make this statement, but it's the new year. You might be thinking about where you want to donate some money. Keep the foundation in mind for other contributions throughout the year, but the beginning of the year is a great time to be thinking about that. Another opportunity to give and support is the End Polio Now campaign with the Iowa Wolves on February 23rd. So if you want to sign up, we have sign-up sheets on the table. If you don't want to go, but you want to contribute, you can do that too. Just let us know if you have any questions. Talk to Jeff Stickle, and Jeff, where are you at? Jeff, thank you for your support. And now we're on to the program, and Sean's going to come on back up. Past President Sean, past District Board Member Sean, and a whole bunch of others are going to come up here and introduce our speaker today. Sean.
Thank you, President-elect Kevin. Friends, you are in for a real treat today. The Mullen family first met today's guest and his family when we moved into the Roosevelt Ingersoll Park neighborhood at the turn of the century. And is it just a turn of the phrase that caught you off guard? And our boys played Raccoon Valley Little League baseball together. Now, I fondly recall many afternoons when our oldest son, Patrick, would jam with our guest in the loft above our garage for hours on end. In fact, if memory serves me right, Max, I think Patrick was on your first album, Give Me the Keys, right? Yeah, as a guitarist and vocalist. Now, because of its location and the importance in the musical formation of our speaker's talent, I'm considering offering personal guided tours of our loft to anyone who makes a generous donation to the Rotary Club of Des Moines Foundation. So you can see me or Doug afterwards for details. Friends, I submit that in the pantheon of musical artists, it is considered the highest honor to sublime to recognition by use of a single name, such as Bach, Beethoven, Edwards, Skeet, Cher, Taylor, Connick, or Sinatra, to name a few. Now, I also happen to think,
I wouldn't have named one of those.
now I happen to think that our guest is quickly becoming known throughout this area by his first name, Max. He has and continues to entice music lovers throughout the region with a sound evoking the likes of Sinatra and Connick. His recordings and performances promise that the great American songbook is alive and well for a new generation of listeners. Max co-founded Noche, a state-of-the-art jazz club in the Western Gateway neighborhood of downtown Des Moines. Additionally, he's appeared at some of the great clubs throughout the country, including Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola at Lincoln Center, to Andy's Jazz Club in Chicago, to Dazzle in Denver, and many, many in between. And performances along such artists as vocalist Rose Colella and pianist Annie Booth have been met with rave reviews. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to our Des Moines' very own Max Wellman.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Sean. I knew that when I found out you were going to be introducing me, I was getting myself ready for what I was sure was going to be a very complimentary and gracious introduction. And thank you. You did not disappoint. I'm going to try to go through a couple of things along my journey, both as an individual performer and as a business person, because now and in the beginning of everything, really, those two pursuits have been very intertwined in all kinds of wonderful and complicated ways. I grew up in Des Moines, and as Sean said, I spent a lot of time doing music and sports as a kid, although it was very clear that my talent was in one of those areas and very much not in the other. As much as I would have wanted it to be the other way around. I grew up in a family that was pretty steeped in small business, and particularly in the hospitality industry. My parents owned and operated Wellman's Pub for quite a while, until I was about halfway through high school. And many people in that family, and on my mother's side of the family, also worked in bars and restaurants. And I think a lot of that was steeped into my personality without me even realizing it growing up. A lot of conversations around the family, the starters were always about how business was last night or how it was going to be tonight, and always a kind of begrudging, optimistic, but somehow negative outlook all the time as well. If you know any small business people, particularly in that industry, I think that'll probably sound familiar. You don't want to ever sound like things are going too well. But at any rate, I had no idea that I would end up even remotely in that industry, both as a kid and then later on. It was pretty clear early on that even though my family was not super into music, that I was, and that I was maybe good at it. And people at our church got me interested in auditioning for choirs and things of that nature. And I cannot overstate, I say this all the time to people, especially when I'm outside of the state of Iowa, what a wonderful community this was to grow up in. At every stage of my personal or professional development, I was fortunate enough to run into wonderful organizations and mentors that guided me along to the next step. Early on, that was teachers like Barbara and Tom Sletto, who taught through the Des Moines Children's Choir, and then later on in the Heartland Youth Choir, and gave me such a great foundation as a musician to really kind of go wherever I would want to with the music. Eventually, by the time I got into my teenage years, I was very, very interested in jazz music. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time around my grandparents. Uh-oh, there we go. I'm familiar with microphone problems, but I came back. Someone testing me. I had developed a love of jazz music very early on, before I knew that that was even a weird thing to go after. I suspect it was because I spent a lot of time with those relatives, often when my parents were working at night or something of that nature, and they happened to be listening to a lot of Ella Fitzgerald and Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra and Harry Connick Jr., and I was obsessed with the music. I really can't remember a time that I wasn't. And by the time I was a teenager, I was very intent on performing that music. And at the time, there wasn't really a framework for that in the school system for singers. I was a trumpet player as well and played some piano, still do. But you could play in jazz bands, but you couldn't sing in them, really. And there was no way to sing this stuff even through the organizations that I was a part of. And so my first venture into any kind of entrepreneurialism was out of necessity. I just wanted to sing the music that I wanted to sing. And what ended up happening was really a series of extremely fortunate events for me, which was at first seemed maybe not like the most logical thing to do, but in my mind it was logical. I thought I need to get hired, and I'm only 15, and I imagined that people would be very skeptical of that. And so I started trying to line up work over the phone strictly through event companies and caterers and anything that you can imagine. I thought to myself, and I still think this, I thought, this is not a normal place for this kind of work to be popping up. You're not going to be a jazz singer in Des Moines, Iowa, just by running into it. But I thought, if anyone could even possibly want to hire someone like that, or a musician, they're going to have to think of me specifically. And I made it my job to meet as many people as I possibly could and get through as many doors as I possibly could before they could build up their skepticism surrounding my age. This worked with musicians as well. A couple of people that I still produce shows with now many years later. I first hired always 5 or 6 performances at a time over the phone, because I figured if they showed up and thought, oh, what is this kid up to? They'd already be on the hook for 4 other shows, and it would be, I'd have like a trial period to try to convince them to stick around. And fortunately they did. But to give you one example of this, Steve Charlson, who some people in this room know for sure, a wonderful member of our musical community, had recently moved back to Des Moines from Missouri right as I was starting to perform. I think I was about 16 years old. And I called him, someone said, hey, Steve is a fantastic bass player and you love playing with him. So I hired him over the phone, and he did show up and seemed a little confused. I think we were playing like a farmer's market in Valley Junction, or we did a string of events for Palmer's Catering, and that it went so well with him that he's my #1 bass player, and we played all over the place, many different states, and done the thing. But the experience of being able to work with such seasoned musicians at a young age is not one that normally people would run into, and it was a wonderful education for me. And a lot of that was due to the great and welcoming musical community that exists in Des Moines, Iowa. Eventually, I got to a place, one thing led to another, and I was basically running a production company. I started working for caterers and things like that. It started right out of necessity, because I thought the only way I'm going to be able to do this music is by getting hired to do it, so I can hire professionals to work with me. And it did allow me to do the music, which I loved. It was always the driver. But I also did not mind getting paid to do it. And that also grew as a pursuit very early on, as a way to just continue going step by step. What makes sense for the next thing in this journey. And I ended up running a production company under my own name that would go, it was another way to get through the door. I knew I couldn't get booked at a place like Hoyt Sherman Place or the Paramount Theater or something like that. But I thought, I'll bet that there's a price tag on renting the place out. And if we can rent it out and sell it out and make money at it, I'll bet we can get hired to come back. And used that model to get into a lot of different theaters, including those ones that I mentioned here in the state. It was an unusual way to get into the business at whatever age, 17, 18, 19, but it really created the foundation for everything that came after. I left to go to school in Indianapolis, went to Butler University and spent time in Indianapolis outside of school as well, a great musical town, and that led to work in Atlanta, Georgia, and then later in San Francisco and the Bay Area in general, very short amounts of time in places like that, also Chicago. And I'm racing through these things, but only to point out that the combination of learning both the scene here locally, the events scene, and the arts community, and the way that worked in Iowa, and then going to much larger places and seeing how the business at large worked and the similarities and the ways in which it was different was another wonderful experience that continues to pay dividends today. Eventually, I was in Des Moines, always steadily working in Iowa, no matter where I was living. The production company lived on, and if I would have an offer to come in and play for some benefit or whatever the thing would be, perhaps play with Richard at the Turner Center Jazz Orchestra, I would always come back and do those things. And so I had a good community of relationships here in music by the time 2014, 2015 rolled around. And I was getting ready to start new work in Chicago when I was approached by the people who would become my business partners at Noche. It was an opportunity. I think of things like this all the time when I'm talking to younger people about getting into not only this business, but any business. You cannot explain the situations that come up, the great opportunity when it comes knocking. You never know when that is going to happen. But you can look back and see 1,000 different steps that led precisely to that moment. And in many ways, this was a thing like that. I had no idea it was coming, but it was the perfect thing to come at that time. Bob Philippone and Maria Reves were looking to buy up some of the last property that was available in that neighborhood of downtown at the time. There had been so much development, even by that time, that was in early stages around that neighborhood. And they wanted the space to be a music venue. And they said that they had talked to several people, consulted with people about who to work with, and offered me the job. Not as a partner originally, but as a contractor to write a business plan and install the principles that we've been using through the production company, expanded into an every week venue. That was a remarkable experience, and that we opened on the last day of 2015. And it has been a great way to blend together so many of those experiences, both as a performer and an entrepreneur. There were many, many different hurdles to clear in having a true brick and mortar space that's going to be producing shows every week of the year, most of them without my name on them. But it's been a joy to reconcile that with my own experiences. Been many things about it that have not been a joy, but that's all part of the process. If you would have told me that we would be here 8 years later, I would have felt very fortunate to have that information, but also if you would have said that we'd make it through the years of 2020 and 2021, I would have had a very hard time believing that. At this time, we host groups from all over the country, at least 4 nights a week, all 12 months of the year, and it has been able to participate in both that local scene I was talking about in such wonderful ways, working with arts organizations and individuals to make all kinds of music happen here locally that maybe didn't happen in precisely that way before Noche was around. We work as a production house, which is a rare kind of thing in that world. I'm able to work with, say, a performer like Gina Gedler, I'm sure some people are familiar with in this room, a wonderful lifelong Iowa performer, actress, and singer. She had all kinds of projects that she had wanted to do in the past, and now can work with a venue hand in hand to hire arrangers. We work with arrangers from all over the country to put shows together in a space that facilitates well-paid work for professional musicians, and that show can run for ticket-buying audiences in a hopefully wonderful atmosphere. It's a great way to work with some people who have been mentors of mine throughout my life. We also serve as a space for touring artists from all over the country in a way that maybe there wasn't exactly a space like that prior to Noche that could sub into all of these tours. Not only for some bigger names in jazz, we've got Benny Green coming in a few weeks, for instance, Oscar Peterson's long ago protege on the piano, one of the great jazz pianists in the world, but also for some of the regional artists like Joanne Parker. We have dozens of people we work with every year that are based in the Midwest and tour all over. And it's almost like having a roster of artists that come through the space every year. I want to close with one thought before we get to questions. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Am I all right? Is that good? Okay. Very early on, I had gotten a gig, a word I still hate, but there's no other word for it. It was a one-time, I don't think it was supposed to be one time, but it ended up being a one-time, one-day festival at the Kirkwood Hotel downtown. And this guy who was very involved in the music scene at the time produced this thing, and he booked Susie Maget and Janie Hooper, Tina Haas-Finlay, and Sam Salomon, and then threw my band on the bill. And it's a day that I will never forget. I was 16, and I met a lot of people who became supporters of mine, who were the first people who were not friends or family to really support what I did. And there was one guy in particular, his name was Charles. He came up and introduced himself after the show. He was so kind and supportive, and he said he wanted to mail me something. And so I gave him my address, and he mailed me an old issue of the New Yorker. It was from the 1970s, and it included a profile of Bobby Short. Bobby Short was, are there people who know who Bobby Short was in this room? I don't want to assume anything. Okay, yes. Bobby Short played to kings and queens and presidents at the Cafe Carlyle in New York for decades. He played multiple shows a night, 10 months a year, and it's really, it's an incredible thing. The room still exists. He did those shows up until the 1990s, but this profile was written in his heyday, and Charles sent it to me thinking, you know, I just think it seems like you love this kind of thing, and it made me think of this piece, and I hope you enjoy it. And he'll never know, but I call back to that piece all the time as a kind of inspiration piece, because at the time I read it, I ate it up and thought, what is this world I want in that world, you know? And always thought of that, and had it in my mind that somehow, someday, I would get to the Cafe Carlyle. Of course, I hoped it would be as a performer. A couple of years ago, more than a couple now, because it was just before the pandemic, I was in New York, lucky enough to be singing at Lincoln Center at Dizzy's with Nate Sparks' big band, and was meeting friends in the city and having just a wonderful time. And there was a performer at the Cafe Carlyle named John Lloyd Young, he's a Tony winner. He was in the debut cast of Jersey Boys, big Broadway singer, now really big on the cabaret circuit, and he was doing a run at the Cafe Carlyle. And we have hosted him twice at Noche for fundraisers as part of a different cause. Anyway, I saw he was on the bill, and I thought, I'm gonna bite the bullet and get tickets. It's a very, very expensive room. And I went to the show, and he must have seen my name on the guest list and remembered Noche. And we had a good experience when he came here, but I never would expect someone to remember specifics or anything like that. Anyway, he must have seen the name, and he shouted out my name and Noche during his show at the Cafe Carlyle. And I thought to myself, you know, course, I didn't know I'd be telling you this, but I thought maybe no one's ever gonna know, but I got, and maybe it didn't happen exactly how I thought it was going to happen, but in one way, I did get to the Cafe Carlisle. Thank you so much for having me, and I guess at this time, I mean, if you have questions, I would be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
Which artist had the most influence on your musical career?
He says, which artist had the most influence on my musical career? You know, that's hard. I think that it would have to be a mix of Harry Connick Jr. and Ella Fitzgerald. I think the earliest stuff you listen to is so foundational and it's just deep in the bones. I listen back to early 90s albums of Harry Connick Jr. and I recognize a lot of tools that I've got in my bag, if that makes sense. Yes?
So you said that you talked a little bit about the struggles becoming singing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything that you do for the next generation of people behind you?
That's a great question. She asked about the struggles as if I understand it right, getting involved in the music as a singer, and if I do anything in that regard. I do. It's very much at the forefront of my mind, and more as time goes by. I have some half-baked plans that I'm not going to share here right now, but it is a priority for the future. Already though, I do really love how Noche gets to act as a kind of incubator in this scene, and I book all of the shows that happen there. And there are a lot of artists through the last several years who have come through there and been able to level up their careers for where they're at. I think to myself all the time about what would have been helpful to me after I had gotten started to have a venue like that, if that makes sense. So I'll work with singers to put shows together and what might play for other venues as they're trying to book their first tours and things like that. And I do enjoy that part of the job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Hi, Ski.
How are you, Max? You've come a long way from Roosevelt.
Yes and no.
Well, we won't go into that. Some of us were here when you did your first gig in the East Village. Tell us a little bit about that.
Are you talking about at the bistro,
Yeah.
the Grand Piano Bistro? He said he wants me to share about a very, very early on performance that happened in the East Village. And you know, that whole process is very indicative of, there's a through line at every stage of this thing, which is, it's a little bit fake it till you make it, but I'd like to think of not quite that phrase, but just a lot of hustle going into making up an opportunity, right? I was fortunate in that my aunt had a restaurant at the time called the Grand Piano Bistro, and she offered to host a release party for a CD, and I thought, oh, that is awesome. I just need a CD now. And putting that all together, I mean, I'm certain it's not like if you were to look up the Idiot's Guide on how to put together an album and release it, you wouldn't find a lot of those steps in there. But I had friends printing out individual CDs, printing art onto them. We had like a whole assembly line of some of my closest friends, including Patrick Mullen. And that big day came, and we packed it out with friends and family. And I went along that way for a while. I did a residency at the Vaudeville Muse for the longest time that was not a space for that kind of music. God love it. God rest its soul. Now it's gone. But and it went so well that I got to do a show there every month for a couple of years, and that helped a great deal. You know, people are much more willing to book you if you're filling seats. I have found that. And I know it in a completely different way now. Booking is a whole special kind of headache. I remember in the early days thinking that it would maybe go a little differently for me than it has for others because I am a part of the musician community, but that was naive. Yes, sir.
You may have answered it, but I'd like to ask performers, what is your favorite venue in America to see music? And then
Oh.
also a follow-up with that, if it's not jazz, what are you listening to?
So he asked about what my favorite venue in the country is to see live music, and then what I'm listening to if it's not jazz. I've got a pretty eclectic mix of music. I've always felt very called to do the music that I do, but I love beautiful songwriting, no matter the genre. I very often am listening to some album by Rufus Wainwright or Brandi Carlile or the Punch Brothers, which is a Chris Thile project. And I think it's really important to keep listening to new things, you know. As far as the venue goes, I am such a huge fan of the Chicago jazz scene. I always will be. And the Green Mill is a very special place to me. It is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continuously running jazz club in the world, and was at one time owned by Al Capone. But it's stayed under private ownership for its entire existence, and so there's still such wonderful lore about the place, and it is still such an authentic piece of Chicago nightlife. People of all ages and all kinds of backgrounds are in there on a nightly basis. It's a beautiful place. Yeah? Great.
And I'm not a big jazz guy, it was just, you gotta go to the Green Mill.
Well, let me talk on that for just 1 second. I meant to hit on that.
Father, I should say, I appreciate it.
No, it's okay. Yeah, that's great. Not a jazz guy. That's okay. And I do think what we tried to build at Noche, and this is very central to our process as we continue to go through time, is a space that exists not just for jazz fans. It's an experience that if you're open to going and seeing something in that world, it doesn't mean you have to go home and throw it on the record player. You know, you don't have to be someone who's listening to Miles Davis all the time to love the experience of going out into a beautiful room and seeing performers, and you know, drinks don't hurt either. Yes, sir.
Can you speak about how you named it Noche?
Sure.
Specific meaning and
Yeah.
why? Yeah.
Noche, what it means and how it was named. We had a list of potential names, and my business partner Maria would be very happy if I gave her full credit for this, so I'm going to, because she also deserves it. She named it, and she reminds me of that all the time. But it's a bit of a double meaning. Phonetically, Noche means nighttime in all kinds of languages, but the specific spelling of it is Italian. Her family has Italian roots, and so did Bob's, and it means walnut in Italian. So it's a little bit like nighttime on Walnut. We're on Walnut Street. Yeah. There you go. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned Bobby Short. He was one of the opening people when the Civic Center opened in the 1980s.
I cannot believe that.
Yes, that's what
I
said.
can't believe I don't know that. Thank you so
You
much.
aren't old enough.
Well, if I only dealt in things I was old enough to deal with, I wouldn't be standing here.
I just thought you might, he was
Yeah,
there,
thank
I
you.
heard him.
Oh my goodness. She said that Bobby Short was one of the first performers at the Civic Center. I'm gonna have to look into that. One of my favorite possessions in my office at Noche is an old poster of Ella Fitzgerald performing with the Des Moines Symphony. But I had not heard of that Bobby Short deal. I'm gonna have to look into that. Yes, sir.
Can you give us just a little teaser on maybe what's in the future for Noche, maybe even an artist or two that
Sure.
maybe are coming that we should kind of take special note of?
Yeah, just asking for a little bit of a preview on what's to come. I will say that we have really doubled down on producing shows in-house. One of my dear friends, Napoleon Douglas, another Roosevelt grad, moved back here from New York a couple of years ago, and we kind of rejuvenated the cabaret programming at Noche and have a whole lineup of shows that are being released now under his name and mine, that we hope to travel with to other venues as well and have Noche act as a producer in that space. I also, there are projects in the works for a second venue in Iowa. So that's something to look for. Thank you so much.
Max, thank you so much for spending your time with us today, and really, thank you for creating a jewel here in the Metro. You're a great example of why we all love the Des Moines area, love living here, and it just adds so much value to our community, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
In your honor, we're donating a book to the Des Moines Public Library. It'll be on the Rotary Rosie Reader Van that we donated, and we'll be traveling around in your honor, so appreciate it. Speaking of music and fun, I got one last chance. Sign up was ended yesterday, but I talked to Kitty, and she's willing to open it up to talk to Kitty or myself to still come. If you haven't signed up for the February Fling, February 16th, now's your time, last chance, and we're going through decades of music, so starting out in the 50s and in the 60s, and so whenever you grew up, we're gonna go through that, and then at the end, we're gonna try and pull everybody out on the dance floor, and I get to embarrass myself in leading the way. So if you haven't signed up, please give us an opportunity to share and build our relationships and enjoy some music. To make this happen, special thanks to Paul Schickler and his Third Ag entity and an anonymous sponsor that helped us put this on, or otherwise we wouldn't be able to do this. So next we have the upcoming meetings. Peter Tien and John Ockenfels about their trip around the world. So that'll be very interesting. No meeting on Thursday the 15th, because you're all going to be there on the 16th with me at Hyperion Field Club. And then on February 22nd, we have Connie Boyce and the new Des Moines mayor. So hopefully you can bring somebody to one of those events. We really appreciate it when you bring guests. Thank you for being here today. Have a great week. We are adjourned.